All right, so you're looking to really boost your English vocabulary. And, well, today we're going to dive deep into this resource.
Yeah.
It's called 50 Words to Transform Your English from Beginner to Advanced.
Ooh, that sounds promising.
Right, I know. So we're going to go from like beginner to advanced pretty quickly.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I think what's really cool about this is that it's not just about like memorizing these big scary words, you know what I mean? It's about using them in actual conversations, like to really make your communication better.
Exactly, whether it's at work or in school or just like chatting with friends.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get started. There are a few words in this list that just like jumped out at me.
Right, let's hear them.
So one of them is ephemeral.
Ephemeral.
Have you ever heard that word before?
I have, yeah.
Isn't it just like a beautiful word?
It is.
It sounds kind of magical, right?
It does.
And it basically means something that lasts for a really short time.
Right.
Like think about a cherry blossom.
Yes, the fleeting beauty of it.
Exactly. It blooms and then it's gone.
Gone.
But like in that short time, it's just gorgeous, right?
It is.
It's just so impactful.
Absolutely.
So ephemeral is like that. You know? It captures those moments.
And I think that's what's so interesting about learning new words like ephemeral. It's like you can suddenly add this whole new dimension to how you talk about things.
Exactly. It's not just about sounding smart.
No, not at all.
It's about expressing yourself.
Exactly.
Like with more precision. Like you could be talking to someone about, let's say, a business opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And you could say, hey, this is like a really ephemeral opportunity.
Okay.
We got to jump on this like right now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It adds a sense of urgency.
Totally. And importance, right?
Yes. It makes it clear that this is not something that's going to last forever.
Exactly. And that's why it's so powerful, right?
It's like you're capturing the essence of the moment.
Yes. So moving on.
Okay.
Another word that I thought was really cool was facetious.
Facetious. Oh, I love that word.
Right. It's fun to say.
It is.
And I always think of like that friend we all have who can like make a joke about anything.
Oh, I know that person.
Right. Even if it's like a super serious situation.
Even when it's like maybe not the best time.
Yeah. And they're just like cracking jokes.
Yeah. And they always have that like mischievous glint in their eye.
Right. Like they can't help themselves. So that's kind of what facetious is all about, right?
It is.
It's that humor that can be a little bit inappropriate sometimes.
Right. It's definitely a double-edged sword.
It is, right? Because sometimes it can like lighten the mood.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can be like, oh no.
Yeah, you really got to know your audience with that one.
Right. And the context.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever tried to be facetious?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
And it just like
backfired.
Totally backfired.
Spectacularly.
I have. I remember one time I was in this like really tense meeting.
Uh-oh.
And I thought, oh, just like lighten things up with a little facetious comment.
Yeah.
And it did not go well. It was like a total flop.
Sometimes it's better to just play it straight.
Totally. It was a good lesson learned.
It is, right. And I think that's part of the journey of learning more advanced English. It's not just about knowing the words. It's about knowing how to use them and when.
Exactly. And sometimes when not to use them.
Right. It's about nuance.
Yes. It's about like reading the room.
Absolutely.
Okay. So another word that I thought was really interesting was gaudy.
Gaudy. Okay.
What do you think of when you hear that word?
I think of like over the top.
Yes. Excess.
Too much.
Right.
Yeah.
Like imagine a house that's covered in every single lawn ornament you can imagine.
Oh, like those inflatable Santas and reindeer.
Yeah. And like pink flamingos and like.
Yeah. And maybe even a giant gnome.
Yes. A giant gnome and like just like everything is just like.
Yeah. Glitter everywhere.
Glitter. Yes. So that's gaudy. Right.
It is. And what's interesting about gaudy is it's so subjective.
It is.
Right? Because what one person thinks is gaudy, another person might think is like totally cool.
Yeah, like artistic or...
Yeah, expressive, bold even.
Right. It depends on your perspective.
Totally. And your taste and maybe your culture too.
Yes, exactly. So we've talked about these words kind of on their own.
Yeah.
But let's see how they work in a sentence.
Okay, yeah.
The source actually gives this great example.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
The haughty manager's facetious comments felt unnecessary, but her benevolent gesture of providing abundant support later softened her image.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Right. There's a lot going on in that sentence.
There is, but it's packed with meaning.
It is. So first of all, we have haughty, which kind of gives you this idea of the manager being like Little arrogant.
Arrogant, disdainful, looking down on everyone.
Right. Not super approachable.
No, not at all.
Then we have those facetious comments.
Right. So she's trying to be funny.
But maybe not succeeding.
Maybe, or maybe just like using humor at the wrong time.
Yeah, exactly. So not making a great impression so far, right?
No.
But then there's this shift.
Yes, there's a but.
Right, a but.
Which is key.
And suddenly she's making this benevolent gesture.
Benevolent, which means...
Generous, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She's showing that she actually cares.
Yes. And she's providing abundant support, meaning...
Like a lot of support, more than enough.
Right. So it's like she goes from this kind of unlikable character to someone who's actually really helpful and supportive.
And it's all because of how these words are used together.
Exactly. So it shows you how, like, just a few well-chosen words
can totally change your perception of someone.
Right. You go from haughty to benevolent.
It's amazing.
It's like a transformation. So now that we've explored these words, how do we actually, like... make them part of our vocabulary?
That's the real challenge.
It is, right. Because it's one thing to, like...
Understand them.
And, like...
But to actually use them.
Use them. Yeah, exactly. So this source has some great tips for this.
Okay, let's hear them.
So, number 1, practice, practice, practice.
Always a good idea.
Right. Like, don't just try to memorize the definition.
Use that to use them.
Use them. So create your own sentences.
Make them your own.
Yes. Yeah. Like, how would you use ephemeral in a sentence?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. And then try to use these words in conversations.
That's the real test, right?
It is, yeah. And this might sound a little silly.
Okay.
But record yourself speaking.
Oh, interesting.
It can really help with pronunciation.
Because sometimes we think we're saying things correctly, but then we hear ourselves and it's like, oh, that's not how it sounds.
Totally. It can be really eye-opening.
It can. So practice, use it in conversation, record yourself.
Yeah, those are like the golden rules.
I like it.
So after this deep dive, what do you think is the biggest takeaway?
I think it's that words are powerful.
They are. They have so much power.
More than we sometimes realize.
Right.
Because they can shape how people see us.
Yes.
They can make a lasting impression.
Right.
And they can even like change the direction of a conversation.
Totally. So it's not just about like sounding smart.
No.
It's about being intentional.
Exactly. Choosing our words with care.
And using them to really make an impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I challenge everyone listening
to
pick one of these words.
Just one.
And try to use it today in a real conversation.
I love it. See what happens.
Yeah. I bet you'll be surprised by how much of a difference it makes.
I think so too.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today.
Oh.
But keep those vocabularies growing. And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Sounds good. Bye for now.
Yay. Hey, everyone, and welcome. You know how sometimes you wish you could just switch between formal and informal English? Like it's nothing?
Like having a secret code, yeah.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today. We've got this awesome cheat sheet all about formal versus informal English, and we're going to break it down.
It's like a superpower, choosing the right words for every situation.
Totally. I mean, imagine going to a job interview and accidentally slipping into super casual slang.
Or using like Shakespearean English when you're just texting your friend.
Oh, been there.
Right.
Not a good look.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. This cheat sheet starts with the core definitions of formal and informal English. And it's really cool how it explains why each style matters.
Yeah, like formal English is all about clarity, respect, you know, sounding professional.
Right. While informal English is warmer, more about connecting with people, showing your personality.
It's fascinating how each style creates a different effect. Like formal language, it's all about being clear and direct, especially when you need to sound authoritative or like an expert. You see it in legal documents, research papers, that sort of thing.
Makes sense.
But informal language, that's how we build relationships. You know, express yourself naturally. Think about how you talk to your family or close friends.
So true. It's like having a whole linguistic toolbox. You choose the right tool for the job. Now, this cheat sheet has this awesome table of word pairs that really show the difference between formal and informal English.
Oh, yeah. Those are great examples.
There are a few that just jump out at me, like purchase versus buy. I mean, they basically mean the same thing, but purchase always feels so much more serious.
Yeah, purchase definitely has that heavier, more transactional feel to it. You wouldn't say, I'm going to purchase a candy bar at the store, right?
Definitely not.
But you would say, the company is considering the purchase of a new building. It's like Purchase is reserved for bigger, more official things.
Interesting. So it's about using the right word for the situation. And speaking of, another word pair I wanted to ask about is obtain versus get. They both mean to acquire something, but obtain just sounds like you had to work so much harder.
You're right on. Obtain implies effort, and often there's a more formal process involved. Like you wouldn't say, I got my degree after years of study. It doesn't have the same impact.
Right.
You'd say, I obtained my degree. It emphasizes the accomplishment, the effort you put in.
Totally changes the feeling. Okay, I'm starting to see how these small word choices can really change how your message comes across. Now let's jump into some real-life scenarios this cheat sheet covers, like job interviews, texting, and social media.
Ooh, yeah, those are where things can get tricky.
It's like navigating a linguistic minefield. Let's start with job interviews. They're already nerve-wracking enough. What's the biggest language mistake you've seen people make in those situations?
You know, it's not always about using the wrong word. It's more about the overall tone and being aware of the context. I once had this candidate who kept using slang and informal expressions throughout the whole interview.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it wasn't that they were trying to be disrespectful or anything, but it created this disconnect. It made it harder to assess their professionalism, how they would fit into the company culture.
I get it. It's like showing up to a fancy dinner party in, like, sweatpants. It's not that sweatpants are bad, they're just not right for the occasion.
Exactly.
So from your experience, what are some key tips for hitting that sweet spot? Being professional, but still sounding natural in a job interview.
Well, clarity and conciseness are always good things to keep in mind. Like instead of saying, I endeavored to ameliorate the situation,
right,
you could simply say, I worked to improve the situation. It gets the point across without being too complicated.
So it's about being impressive without being confusing.
Exactly. And don't forget about your nonverbal communication too. Body language, tone of voice, those all play a part.
True. It's all about sending the right signals. All right, let's move on to something you mentioned earlier, texting. I know you're super busy. Do you ever find yourself overthinking your texts, especially when it comes to slang or abbreviations?
Oh, all the time. Texting is naturally informal, but there's still a spectrum there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll type something out and then think, wait, is this too casual? Or will they even understand this abbreviation?
Me too. Like, should I use lol or actually type out, that's funny? It's a real dilemma.
Right. So how do you figure out where the line is, especially when you're texting someone new?
Right.
I think it comes down to, reading the room, even if it's a virtual room. Pay attention to how the other person is texting. Are they using lots of slang, emojis?
Yeah.
Then you can probably loosen up a bit too, but if they're more reserved, it's better to be a little more careful, at least at first.
So it's a bit of a dance, like you said before, mirroring and adapting. That's really helpful. Okay, but what about social media? That feels like a whole different beast. You're potentially talking to tons of people at once.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the formal-informal balance there?
Social media is interesting because it often blends different levels of formality. You might be commenting on a friend's silly post 1 minute and then having a serious discussion in a professional group the next.
Right.
It's like having multiple conversations happening at the same time.
I never thought about it that way. So it's even more important to think about your audience and the purpose of your message.
For sure. Think about who you're trying to reach and what you want to achieve with your post or comment. Are you sharing a personal story, offering professional insights, or just messing around? That'll help you decide how formal to be.
Makes sense. Okay, we've talked about all these specific situations, but I'm curious. Have you ever come across a situation where the line between formal and informal was just totally blurred? Like you had no idea which style to use?
Oh, absolutely. It happens more often than you'd think. One that comes to mind is online forums, those communities where people from all walks of life come together. You might have someone using super technical jargon in one comment and then someone else responds with a meme.
Oh, wow, a real mix.
It's a linguistic melting pot.
Sounds kind of overwhelming. So how do you even approach a situation like that?
I think the key is to be adaptable and focus on being clear. Even if you don't understand every single word or reference, try to get the main idea and respond in a way that's clear, respectful, and relevant to the topic. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you need it.
Great advice. So it's all about being flexible and open to learning. Okay, I'm feeling way more confident about handling these tricky situations now. But before we jump into the next part of your cheat sheet, let's take a quick breather and recap what we've covered so far. We started by defining formal and informal English, those two distinct styles. Then we dug into those tricky word pairs like purchase versus buy, and saw how those subtle choices can really change your message. And we even tackled those real-life communication minefields like job interviews, texting, and social media. We learned how to find that balance between being professional and being ourselves.
And the big takeaway is that language is constantly changing, right? So we got to be willing to adapt and learn as we go.
Love that perspective. It's not about always getting it right. It's about being aware, adaptable, and enjoying the ride. And speaking of enjoying the ride, let's buckle up and get ready to explore the fascinating world of how language evolves in the next part of our deep dive. Things are about to get even more interesting.
Welcome back, everyone. Before we got sidetracked with all those real-life scenarios, we were talking about how language is always evolving. I mean, think about how much English has changed even in the last few years. All those new slang terms, all those online expressions.
It's crazy, right? I feel like I need a dictionary just to keep up with my younger cousin sometimes. It's like they're speaking a whole new language. But seriously, how does all this change affect the whole formal versus informal thing? Is formal English becoming like a dinosaur?
That's a really interesting question, and it's actually something that linguists are studying right now. Formal English definitely still has its place. Think about academia, law, government. Those are places where it's still really important.
Right, for official stuff.
Exactly. But it's not immune to change. Even something like email. Think how we used email 10 or 15 years ago. It was always so formal.
Well, you're super serious.
But these days, it's much more common to use relaxed language, especially with colleagues or clients you know well.
I definitely do that. I'm way more comfortable using contractions and even emojis in work emails now. Just depends who I'm emailing, of course.
Right. It's about finding that balance, being professional, but also building relationships.
Totally. And that's where things get really interesting, right? The lines are blurring in a lot of contexts.
Yeah. Like social media is a perfect example, especially LinkedIn. You've got this mix of professional networking and more casual interaction. You might have a CEO posting this super insightful article, and then the next minute they're sharing a funny story about their weekend.
It's true. It's like a whole new world of communication. So are you saying we need to become like linguistic chameleons, constantly adapting to each platform and audience?
Well, it can feel like that sometimes, right? But I think the key is to be aware of what's going on, what the different expectations are. We don't have to abandon all the rules of formal English, but we can also be flexible and creative with informal language.
That reminds me of the practice exercises you included in the cheat sheet.
Oh,
they're not just about memorizing rules. They're about trying different styles, finding your own voice.
exactly. Like there's one where you rewrite a formal email in a more casual way, and then the other way around. It really gets you thinking.
It's like a workout for your language skills.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that language is a tool, and just like any tool, we need to know how to use it for different purposes.
I love that analogy, and that's one of the most important things to remember. Language is a tool. Just like a carpenter wouldn't use a hammer for every job, we need different linguistic tools for different situations.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like I can handle anything. But this whole idea of language evolving, it makes me wonder, what does this mean for the future of communication? Are we all going to end up just talking in emojis and internet slang?
That's a really fascinating question, and honestly, I don't think anyone knows for sure. There are some linguists who think we're moving towards a more informal, global style of communication, where things like grammar and formality become less important. Others think there will always be a need for clear, precise language, especially in professional and academic settings.
Right, it makes sense.
And then there are those who believe that technology, like AI, will play a huge role in shaping how we communicate in the future. Think about voice assistants like Siri and Alexa. They could potentially change the way we speak and write.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. So many possibilities. I can't even imagine what English will be like 50 or 100 years from now.
Me neither. But it's exciting to think we're all part of this evolution, right? Contributing our own words, phrases, ways of speaking.
Totally. Maybe someday my younger cousins will be teaching me the latest slang. Who knows? But for now, I feel way more equipped to handle the way things are now. We've covered so much formal and informal English, word choices, those tricky real-life situations.
Yeah, and we've learned that language is always changing, so it's a journey, really. Always something new to learn.
And speaking of journeys, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back to share some final thoughts and inspiration before wrapping up this deep dive. All right, we're back. I hope you had a chance to really think about how you can use all these formal and informal English skills in your own life. It's kind of like we've given you this treasure map, right? But now it's up to you to go out and explore.
I like that, a treasure map. And just like any explorer, you're going to run into some unexpected things, maybe a few challenges, but also some amazing discoveries.
For sure. Okay, before we wrap up our deep dive into formal versus informal English, let's do a quick recap. We started by defining those two styles, formal being all about authority and respect, and informal being more about connecting with people, letting your personality shine through. We even looked at those tricky word pairs like purchase versus buy and obtain versus get.
Yeah, the subtle differences can really make a big impact.
And we talked about all those everyday situations that can be tricky. Job interviews, texting, social media. We figured out how to strike that balance between being professional and being authentic.
It's like having a secret code for communication.
Totally. But honestly, the most fascinating part for me was realizing that language is never really finished. It's always changing, so we have to be ready to adapt.
It's true. The way we communicate today is totally different from even a few decades ago, and who knows what it'll be like in the future.
That's what makes it so exciting. But it also makes you wonder, right, what about the future of language? I mean, we talked about social media and technology, but what about AI? Do you think things like Siri and Alexa will change how we use formal and informal English?
That's a great question. Will we all start speaking in these perfectly grammatical sentences? Or will that casual conversational style from texting become even more common? It's really hard to say.
I know, right? It's kind of mind-blowing. It makes you realize how powerful language is.
Absolutely. It's something we often take for granted, but it shapes how we think, how we interact, how we see the world.
So true. Well, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with this thought. Whether you're using formal or informal English, the most important thing is to communicate clearly and respectfully, and to let your own unique voice come through.
That's a great way to put it. Don't be afraid to experiment, try new things, make mistakes. That's how we all learn and grow.
Exactly. And remember, language is constantly evolving, so enjoy the journey. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.